So last week I uploaded my Ayaka free speed run. The final time was pretty respectable. If I waited a few days for more optimal cards and sweated harder, I think I could have saved 3, maybe 4 seconds. But regardless, still very fast for a full C0 team. So one of the reasons I decided to make this video is because people get asked quite a lot on the difference between Rosaria, Shenhe and Ganyu and how worth Shenhe is. I feel like those of you who've been playing Ayaka for a while and you did wish on Shenhe despite all the negativity surrounding her release, you know that with your fully invested team, the difference that she brings is huge. This speedrun is a great demonstration of that. So what are her main strengths? Summarized: number 1, her skill is flexible, strong, front-loaded damage. Number 2, her power budget is largely focused on buffing Ayaka. A lot of this is in the power of her elemental skill. My Ayaka's burst already does a lot of fast damage, but if you can see how Shenhe's skill acts as like a turbo boost to it, I would say this is one of those things that are stronger in practice than theory. If I could summarize it, I would say power budgets focused on buffing Ayaka. It means the more invested your Ayaka is, the more value you get out of Shenhe. So in comparison with teams packing another damage dealer, less buff oriented, it's pretty clear that adding their own damage does little to affect Ayaka. I think you can visualize this like split scaling. Imagine getting an artifact upgrade for Ayaka will not improve Ganyu's output, or getting Mist Splitter will not improve Ganyu's output. But with Shenhe, if you get a weapon upgrade or you get an artifact upgrade on Ayaka, getting more crit damage or more damage bonus increases the effectiveness of both Ayaka's personal damage and Shenhe's icy quills. We can see what the numbers say. If you've checked my KQM Ayaka guide, at the bottom of it has been this Google sheet and it's been pretty popular. It's a collection of Ayaka freeze teams made by Colibri, and a few others like myself helped with fine tuning it. Just 2 disclaimers before I speak any more about it. Number 1, I don't actually endorse comparing different teams' rotation damage. However, the reason why this is fine is that it only looks at Ayaka freeze teams. You are mostly comparing the same roles and it helps people build their Ayaka teams. Number 2, this is outdated. It seems the sim has had huge updates recently to make it more accurate, like hit lag implementation and detailed frame counts. Although this sheet did use a custom version of the sim that had early fixes that we added, like fixing Ayaka's frames and swap times manually. But these kind of corrections have now been integrated in the new update of the sim, hence a project like this is kind of outdated now and needs updating. However, it's still okay for the purpose of this video, as like I said, it's only comparing Ayaka teams, meaning even if a character like Ayaka had small inconsistencies, those inconsistencies should be consistent across all the teams here, if you get what I mean. So we can look at the single target comparisons, and the premium Shenhe freeze team is high here, and Shenhe in general excels. That's pretty straightforward and obvious. Over to the primary target tab, which is multi-enemy calcs, and things can look a lot closer. Obviously, number 1, Shenhe's icy quill damage does not last long in AoE, and number 2, a character like Ganyu's burst can hit enemies more. However, as I'm showing this, don't focus on the exact numbers too much, but the point is you can see how other options can number wise have similar potential to Shenhe. So let's dissect this. Going back to the gameplay, see, Shenhe does an okay amount of damage herself, but you could say maybe 80% of her value is in the buffs and the icy quills. And if you look at this, almost all of that is front loaded, meaning it comes out quick. Switching her in to use her hold E, you could say this is kinda similar to a C6 Ganyu charge attack hit. It's a bit like attaching a quick nuke to Ayaka's burst. On the other hand, Ganyu and Rosaria do bring nice team buffs. Ganyu gives cryo damage and Rosaria gives crit rate, but Ganyu's damage is sustained. Her burst does deal good damage, but to get the full value out of it, you would always have to be casting a burst and probably even adding some charge attacks in your rotation. This means there is little flexibility like you can with Shenhe. Even though this is an AoE chamber, I would confidently say with Ganyu this would be a lot slower. And then with Rosaria, if you're building her with a typical Favonius Lance and Noblesse set, her value is mostly in battering and crit bonus. If you try to do something similar to Shenhe and switch to her skill during Ayaka's burst, it won't really be adding any notable damage. Shenhe's builds have the same gear, so comparing Rosaria's crit rate to Shenhe's damage buffs and res shred, it's a sizable loss of damage. And actually, if Ayaka's burst doesn't wipe them here, I imagine having to finish them off with charge attacks would add a lot of time onto my run. Now another thing with calcs that might not be obvious, but hopefully I can explain this well. You see, all 4 characters have the same levels of investment. If you see the calcs that we just looked at, you will see Ayaka has the craftable katana. Now obviously this is very reasonable for many players, however I imagine this is most likely to be worst case, but the rest of the team this is very common gear. For Ayaka though, what's more common is maybe having Mist-Splitter and maybe spending much more resin farming her artifacts than other members of the team. So this goes back to what I initially said. A character like Ganyu is contributing to the team with sustained damage of her own. While Shenhe is doing okay damage herself, more of her value is in buffing the team and Ayaka. What does this mean? Again, it means the more invested your Ayaka is, the better a team with Shenhe will scale. I also want to cover why Fav Lance is really powerful on Shenhe. Obviously, Fav weapons for supports overall in any team is known to be powerful. However, I think Shenhe takes full advantage of one, especially if it's highly refined. If you look at my setup, Shenhe uses her skill during my team's setup, and then I always bring her on again during Ayaka's nuke to boost the damage. And actually, if a chamber is quick like this, I can use a tactical hold E to generate an extra particle and a bit more extra damage. This means every chamber you're basically getting 7 to 8 cryo particles and potentially 2 fav procs. Even if my Ayaka nukes the entire chamber in one go, it's very unlikely for me to be lacking energy for the next chamber. And here's another thing, which is actually why I would say it's better to get a C1 before her weapon. Obviously, Calamity Queller is a powerful weapon, so regardless it will be stronger than Fav Lance, but aside from losing Fav Lance's energy, which as I explained is very powerful for consistency across chambers. If you notice how my Shenhe is on field a lot when I use her E the second time, this means a lot of the time you don't actually fully benefit from the weapon's passive. You lose this attack because you're not off field, so it loses quite a bit of value. Also, Shenhe is actually relatively cheap. Besides her weapon, her artifacts are very flexible. You probably already know this, but the most common and optimal gear is Noblesse and just stacking as much attack as possible. This is for the max buff. But if you've seen calcs, you will know that she can also use mixed attack sets, Blizzard Strayer, and as far as main stats, she can also use a Cryo Cup and build crit. These sorts of things can scale better in AoE because the quills run out fast. However, the point of all this is that it's very easy to have optimal artifacts for Shenhe. She doesn't need pieces with high crit, and you can save your cryo goblets for Ayaka. It's also pretty likely that if you're an old player you have these Noblesse pieces hanging around already. That's the last key factor. Once you have a high attack set for Shenhe, any tenacity set for Kokomi, an EMVV set for Kazuha, then you can see it's just completely optimal to just spend all your resin farming for Ayaka. You don't need to worry about farming for a sub DPS, and any artifact upgrades on Ayaka will be magnified in this team more than others. I hope this video was helpful, especially for those of you playing freeze teams and those of you who may be on the fence in regards to getting Shenhe or not. She's very powerful, but I think she's one of those characters who only after getting her you realise her true potential.